hit record too. Mitch, we'll get you going soon. So, oh, okay. Sorry, Yolanda, the mic's not working, but hello from Texas. Bonnie's here. She's feeling good about basketball because the Celtics, oh my gosh, they keep winning. Good for Boston. Aaron from Ontario, Canada, excited. Wonderful. Chris from Logansport, Indiana, excited to learn. A lot of excitement, so that's good, right, Mitch?
Yeah, that makes me feel good.
Another Yolanda, relaxed. Good for you. First week of summer vacation.
Yeah.
I need to know, Yolanda, like what's the go-to for relaxation? Is it a book? Is it a glass of wine? Something else? Kyle chimed in from Sacramento, grateful. Are you guys neighbors, you and Mitch?
We are
close.
colleagues.
Yeah.
Mitch got me to work at his school with him.
Brilliant. Awesome. Leah here from Southern California. Leah, I'm going to move there one day, and I'm glad you're excited. Melissa said she's a Rangers fan and go New York. Really cool. Awesome. Pat from Buffalo. Pat, I'm just down in Syracuse. Did you know that? Yeah, I think we've talked before. Sabrina from New Jersey. Yolanda said yoga and hiking. Don't do both at the same time, though. That could be dangerous. Jeremy from Texas and relaxed. Sabrina feeling rushed. Okay, take a deep breath. You could breathe with us, Sabrina. Beth from Wisconsin, not in a tent, in chill right now. And Jacqueline from Australia. Wow. It's morning for you. Is it 6:30 in the morning? I know it's morning time over there. Thanks for joining us this early.
Yeah.
8 a.m. All right, brilliant. Even better. So you've had some coffee or tea. You're good to go. Cool. Well, let me introduce Mitch. Probably, I'm thinking many of you know me, but I guess maybe not because I know Mitch promoted this too. So I'll introduce myself as well. My name is Danny. I like to say that I was a chronically late student, right? Always late. And one day walking into Mr. Rogers' science class, I let him know that I saved a whole troop of Girl Scouts from a burning house, right? And I don't know if it was the very made up story or the very real do-si-do, those are the peanut butter cookies, or a combination of the two that got me out of detention that day. But that lesson taught me it pays to tell stories. And I've been telling stories ever since, right? Podcasts, books, mastermind, webinars, all this kind of stuff. So that is me. And my buddy Mitch, he is amazing. How I'm going to introduce him. How does a mediocre student become a gifted teacher? Whether it was the 7 years it took Mitch to graduate from college or the ultra marathons he runs regularly, Mitch found success via his strong mindset and predictable routines. And it just so happens that highly successful teachers build their classrooms the same way. When students learn to develop their executive functioning skills and teachers establish predictable learning routines, student success soars. This is the foundation of Organized Binder and the secret of every successful classroom. So, and colleagues with the very cool Kyle. So we're excited he's here. And Tori, hello from is HTX Houston? Is that what that means? And feeling alert. So that's awesome. Yes, sir. All right. Yes, ma'am. Cool. Mitch, I'm done. It's over to you. This is your show.
Done. All right. Well, thanks for being here, everybody. Big shout out to my friend Danny. We've been in cahoots and collaborating for quite some time. And we thought it would be fun to do this together here. I'm just trying to share my screen. Danny, audio check real quick. Are we okay? I was a little hung up earlier. Am I sounding all right?
So far, pretty good. And if it messes up, you'll hear me screaming in terror. So, all right.
All right.
Yeah.
Let me know. Some Wi-Fi issues here. I'm just waiting for the Zoom bar to do its magic and go away, hopefully, so I can get to the play. All right. So if you know me and my work, as a quick intro, I am a practicing high school teacher. And I created a system a number of years ago called Organized Binder that you may have heard Danny chatting about, or you may know from other sources. And it's all about giving students exposure to executive functioning skills, also sometimes known as non-cognitive factors or soft skills, 21st century skills. By the way, we should say Danny will be keeping an eye on the chat. Is that true, Danny? Should I ignore
Yeah.
chat or pause to
No,
pull it up? Okay.
I'll keep an eye on it.
He's keeping an eye on it, so you can interrupt us that way. And I formed a company called Organized Binder around the work, and we now have the great privilege of working with schools and districts and colleges around the country and some internationally. And about a year ago, or maybe sometime recent, I just kind of had a feeling or a conviction that there are a number of teachers or schools that really see the need for this work, and in particular, coming off the last 2 years, that may not have access to Organized Binder or the funds to purchase that, because it does come with the materials. And so I started giving talks, basically, how do you do this work without Organized Binder? And that's really what this is. It's like, how do you guarantee success by giving students practice with these executive functions? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move fairly quick, and I'm going to share a lot of really important information. So I would encourage you, if you don't have it right now, run over and grab a notepad and a pen or pencil to write some things down. At the end of this, I'll throw up my contact information if you want any information from me or anything like that, or want to follow up. But I do think you're going to write some of these things, want to write some of these things down. And I love this. I pulled this from off Instagram, Mindful Teacher Rachel. You can give her a follow. But of course, just as we cannot expect students to automatically know how to read, we can't expect them to automatically develop these executive functions. And they're so critical as the foundation for learning. And yet oftentimes we kind of just wait for or hope that students kind of pick them up through osmosis. But we know from research and writing, and even just from being in the classroom, that they have a significant impact on students and their ability to succeed. And if I could draw your attention to the second sentence here, if we can improve a child's environment in specific ways that lead to better executive functioning, we can increase his or her prospects of success in a particularly efficient way. So you are in the right place, whether you are a school leader, district leader, classroom teacher, whoever you are, you're in the right place if your students are struggling to engage and focus. This has become kind of a universal with schools that we're partnering with. You want strategies to hone your class time management and behavior management skills. You are seeking to develop a more consistent learning routine. You're in the right place if you've noticed that technology has not solved and maybe be even exacerbating issues resulting from the pandemic. And you're in the right place if you're looking for new ways to engage families. And I hope at the end of this, you're going to feel this way with some of the strategies that you've learned. And here's 5 takeaways I hope you have. And don't feel like you got to write all of these down. I hope you understand or take away from this that predictable learning routines create safer learning environments where students are more likely to take risks that really are inherent to learn. So I'm going to focus on this routine. Of course, I'm going to be focusing on executive functions, really as a foundation, the bedrock for academic, but they're also the skills and habits we use in the workplace. So academic and workplace success. And students need them now more than ever. If we're really going to address learning loss or interrupted learning, or whatever you want to phrase the last 2 years, it's definitely had an impact. And just moving faster through content or doubling down on maybe content that was missed is not going to help. We have to get at what fosters learning in the first place, and that's these executive functions. And here's the big takeaway of this talk. When students get practice with these skills in a no-stakes environment, when they get practice with these skills, by virtue of engaging in a predictable routine, it's a win-win. So that's a big one I hope you take away. there's power in shared routines, and they don't have to infringe upon academic freedom. In other words, teaching executive functions, which is what we're going to talk about today, does not need to in any way interfere with the teaching of content, if you're a teacher, that you are hired and charged to do. And obviously, we all know that students that have more engaged family members or parents are simply more successful. All right, a digital note, and then we'll move on. I'm going to talk about analog, tactile, kinesthetic, color-coded things, all right, to really hone these executive functions. I teach, and Kyle can confirm this as my colleague, I teach in a fully online asynchronous independent study program, and my students use a physical binder. Okay, so they're using Organized Binder. Just want you to know, it's not this talk, but we can have that conversation about the power of blending digital learning environments with analog sources. So here's the vision I have, and I want to share it with you. The academic success and agency for some students is hard to grab and get hold of. And with the way I the analogy I've thought of and come back to, have done for many years, is it's kind of like this. Like if you were to give, and spoiler alert, I'm an undergraduate in geology, so I love maps and compasses and everything. But if you were to give somebody a map and a compass and a ruler and a pencil, and you pick some destination, which would be, in school would be, whatever my goal is, and you set them out on their journey. Well, if they've never had practice using any of those devices or resources, of course, they'd be less likely to navigate to their destination, less likely to be successful. And you might think, well, okay, in today's era, we would just plug that destination into GPS and it would take us there, which is a fantastic technology, of course. But for our students who are struggling to focus or struggling to find motivation, and I would argue almost all students coming off of the last 2 years, it's a similar situation. We've equipped them with devices, and oftentimes many devices and resources to help them be successful. But it's like they're in the wilderness where there is no GPS, there is no signal, and they have all this stuff, but they have no idea how to employ it. They lack these skills that they need to utilize the things we've equipped them with. And that's what these executive functions are. And the only way to learn them is really to practice them and begin to hone them. And when you do, here's the shift that happens in students. Rather than experiencing education as kind of a passive object, like I'm here, it's happening all around me, I have this stuff, they start to become more active participants in the process. And that's that agency piece that develops when we hone executive functions. Got to come out of Annie, I'm kind of hung up. Oh, there it goes. All right. Why are they important now? As I said, they're the foundation for success. Students develop this agency when they get practice with them. And this is really interesting, these last 2 bullet points. There's newer research that's come out of Stanford that shows that the part of the brain where we're processing various executive functions actually helps protect against depression and anxiety that might result from traumatic events, maybe like the last couple of years. So not only are we helping students be academically more successful, we actually are helping them in an emotional, like a well-being way when they're honing these executive functions, which I think is just fascinating. I have to make a note here of tier 1. A lot of this work around executive functions has kind of lived in the special education world, in my opinion. And I'm kind of on a mission to bring this work to the general ed classroom because it's really needed. And when we consider MTSS or an MTSS pyramid at a school, the foundation, that universal tier 1, is so critical. And the reason this work really is that there's 2 things that happen, I think, with a tier 1 or need to happen is 1, they help identify areas of concern or area of need in students. But 2, and I don't feel like this is talked about enough, a true universal tier 1 would at times help mitigate that or help that, whatever that issue might be, so that we can really figure out, well, what are our tier 2 concerns, right? So a good friend of Danny and I he has a great saying, or one he borrowed from somebody, that you can't tier 2 your way out of a tier 1 problem. If you're running everything up the MTSS pyramid, it's going to overtax the system. So things that maybe aren't a tier 2, they're still a concern or an issue that need to be addressed and mitigated. You really need this work with executive functions there to make that a reality. All right, so what are they? They are the mental processes that enable us to plan, focus attention, remember instructions, and then juggle multiple tasks successfully. Okay, that's what these are. The 6 that are inherent, and I should make a note, you're going to see some images of organized binders, materials from my company. I'm going to show you the daily learning routine from Organized Binder. I'm only showing you all this just to get you thinking. Okay, it's not a way to like say, hey, you should check out Organized Binder. I really mean that. Like, I'm going to show it to you, and then I'm going to show you this is what it could look like in a learning environment that's not using Organized Binder. Okay, and encourage you to start to think about how would you iterate on that for your environment. The 6 executive functions that have a direct impact on academic achievement, according to research, are these 6. The 3 we're going to have time for today in our short webinar here. We're going to start with working memory. We're going to look at planning and time management and organization. I'll make a note of the other 3 at the end. But those are the 3 we're going to talk about in the time we have today. Okay. And here's the good news. So I had said you're in the right place, and I listed all those for your students who are struggling. The good news is when these executive functions are practiced, they actually get stronger. Okay. So to that point from the Instagram clip, we can't just expect any longer for students to hopefully pick them up. They need strategy. So I love this. With training and practice, children can learn to master memory, organizational, and other strategies that will serve them to be more independent learners and help level the playing field. All right, here they are. If you're writing anything down, and then we're going to jump in. The meat of this will be the routine. So the first is being explicit. This has to be very overt. It can't be implicit or ambiguous at all. We have to establish that predictable learning routine, and students need to see these executive functions modeled. Okay, so 3 strategies. I'm going to go over them briefly right now. So being explicit. And I love this saying here that ambiguity is the enemy, right? You have to script the critical moves. So it's very kind of like I'm saying, being very overt and explicit. So with Organized Binder, this program I designed, it's color coded, like I said, tactile, kinesthetic, this tangible thing. And each of these has a specific executive function we're practicing. So there's no mistake about what's happening. Okay. So that's the first. The second is the routine, the learning routine. A predictable learning space is safer for students. They want to be there more, especially for students who life outside of school is not predictable. Maybe it's quite chaotic and unsafe. So we can't underestimate that. But also as a mechanism for learning. So consider one unmistakable driver of students' achievement: carefully built and practiced routines, just consistency. And when students engage in a consistent learning routine, they're using less cognitive energy navigating the class period or navigating the school day because they know what to expect. Okay. The daily routine with Organized Binder looks something like this. If this is at the beginning, we end this way. It's a way to make bell-to-bell instruction a reality. And so the daily routine I'm going to teach you today really is meant and designed to exploit the first few minutes of class or the school day or the learning period, whatever it's called, and the last few minutes. Okay. Historically, some of the most underutilized school time, those first few and last few minutes. But to the point, teachers have a job to do. that blue circle, you have to teach your class. You have content you have to get through, and we don't want to infringe upon that. And then the third is modeling. So explicit and having a routine. In moving to college and career readiness for all, we must now teach some skills formerly learned by students on their own, aka executive functions. All students need lessons and modeling of these skills, okay? What I'm going to show you, so that's why we have these binders in Organized Binder. That's why there's a class sample binder, so you can actually see it there physically. You see it being used, so you have that model. And they love them. Okay, let's get to it. We're going to jump into a daily routine. Quick time check, we're doing okay. And here we go. So the daily routine that I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to address each of these executive functions, defining some of them. Some of them you will already know. But we're going to go to the beginning with a beginning routine, and the skill that's used. And again, here's what it would look like on an Organized Binder. The skill is something called working memory. And this is one of those that I will define for you because it's kind of elusive. But I want to pause real quick. If you're thinking about these predictable routines, there's immense power. If you're a school leader or teacher leader or whoever you are, if you can consider colleagues sharing a similar or the same learning routine. Of course, even though the content, the culture, the feel of the class is different, but how it functions. So when students start to have that predictable experience, and this is upper elementary, middle, and high school, where they're going from class to class to class, think of it back to those mental calories that can be expended just navigating. I'm in 6 different environments that function differently, that have different expectations. That can be really hard. I'm thinking right now of our multi-language learners or students with any learning differences. And so if we can commit to a shared routine that's hyper predictable, it goes a long way for students. So working memory, what is it? This is, like I said, one of those elusive ones. It can be described as the ability to utilize information held in memory to solve a problem or task. And we know that students with weak working memories struggle in the class. And it's also shown that students with weak working memories have poor attentional skills. They have trouble paying attention. So now think about this. If that's the students you're working with, you're giving them practice with this working memory, which I'll describe in a second, but there's also a color-coded, predictable routine, right? Something tangible with a binder that helps them pay attention as well. Okay, so let me show you what this would look like in an Organized Binder, and then show you what it would look like in a class that's not using that. For us, it's on that B tab, behind the B tab, we have something called the Weekly Lifeline. And this is where we begin and end every day, right? We begin with something, we call it a kickoff. You can call it anything you want. You've probably heard of these or used them, a bell rung, a do now, etc. And the point here with the kickoff is just like with a soccer game, when you kick off the game, everybody has to be ready to go. And if you've played soccer your whole life, and I used to use this with my students when I was first designing this, like you show up to the match and you don't think about it anymore, but there's all this stuff happening, yourself included, to get ready. And you all know there's this expectation that when the whistle blows and the game begins, you better be ready to engage. And it's the same thing for learning. You can't just kind of wander into class with nothing from yesterday and making no connections to tomorrow and just kind of show up. Like there's this process to get ready. And in this class, the good news is you're going to see that modeled for you every day. So I'd have this projected behind me, and they would just know it's a nonverbal visual cue that I just need to have my binder open to this page when we're going to start. It's that simple. And then we begin with a prompt. And what most teachers are doing with this prompt is that it gives them, first of all, a chance to reteach and revisit previous lessons, objectives, or standards, if it's a standards aligned course. And for students, it's kind of like a safety net. It's not a quiz. It's okay to get it wrong, but I can get my questions answered, clear up my misconceptions. But think about this now. If this was this hypothetical Monday in September of 22, if I'm here with you on Monday and I'm offering a prompt from the previous lesson, which let's say was Friday, What students have to do is they're going back and they're interacting with and retrieving what they've been exposed to or what they learned previously. And they're holding on to it long enough to make connections with what they're doing in the current moment, responding to this prompt or whatever that might look like. So in other words, they're utilizing their working memory every day when we start. They don't even realize it, but that's actually what's happening. And the more they use it, the stronger it gets. So I get this chance to reteach. So the whole idea of kind of one and done is gone. And students, again, know that they have a chance to get things squared away before we move on. And if we're consistent with this routine, so with Organized Binder, you can see that 5 in the upper right-hand corner. This would be the 5th week of using the program. Let's just pretend that we're getting to the end of our first unit of curriculum. We could have, and I've done this each day, consistent routine. If I am teaching a standards aligned course, I could have as many as 25 standards aligned prompts with responses, or probably better said, students could have 25 standards aligned prompts with the responses that they can use to learn to study from. This is in their binder, it's theirs that they can have. And it's kind of scripting out my unit and the really salient or key points or objectives. What it might look like if you didn't use Organized Binder. Here's someone this is a class sample that was sent in. You can see they're using the Kickoff language. You can use any language you want. You could see they don't always have to be, these prompts, they don't always have to be written, right? You can do just about anything you want with them. It's just a moment, a way to kick the class or the learning session or the school day off when we begin. It is this chance to reteach. Students are recording it, okay? Really important. And that it's not a quiz, that it's meant to be this time that we're getting going. We're prepped before so we can kick the class off. I get to revisit and reteach, okay? Again, another example of what it might look like if you're not using our program. One thing I will say, I had to come back to Organized Binder for this because I don't have a sample of this in a non-Organized Binder class. We conclude this kickoff, because I think it is important to have something that kind of wraps it up. We call it the checkbox. And all students do. It's a simple self-assessment, okay? They write the scale most of us use as a 1 through 5. 1's like, I'm lost, I need some help. 5 is like, I think I'm getting it. And when we get done, most of us just say, okay, now check yourself. And students take a moment, just a few seconds, and they fill in the checkbox. Now, if you think about what's happening there's just a few things that are important. It's kind of this metacognitive strategy for students where how often do students really get opportunities in the modern classroom to pause and do it? Where am I on that, right? So that doesn't happen very often. And for teachers, this is all like pure formative assessment. I would encourage teachers to be walking around, if you are going to have this checkbox as the way to end some type of starter, because you may have thought you gave the greatest lesson on Friday. Here we are on Monday, and anyone that was present is going to be like a 4 or 5, and you're walking around and the majority of the class is a 1 or 2, or the opposite. Maybe you flubbed it on Friday and you're like, oh gosh, and everyone's kind of self-assessing as a 4 or 5. So it can be really critical feedback for you in the moment. But the thing I love most about this, and which is why I'm highlighting it, is it creates a learning environment where it's okay to be on the journey, right? It's okay to be a 1 or a 2 or whatever. And I think students tend to think of learning as like very binary, very black and white, like I got it or I don't. I'm good at this subject or I'm not, right? And we know that's just not the case. There's going to be times where you don't got it. But if you can hone the skill of figuring out where you are on the journey, that's actually probably more critical than just trying to be a 4 or a 5. So I love that I can express that to students and kind of create that learning environment. All of these starters, hold on to them. They end up back in a binder. In Organized Binder, they're behind the B tab, they're page B, the Weekly Lifeline. You could make up any names you want for those tabs, but keeping a collection of them, whatever that might look like for you, so that students have that resource to look back on as they're studying or reviewing. And think about this, if you're consistent, each day. And at the end of the semester, let's say it was an 18-week semester, that's 18 times 5 is 90 standards or objectives aligned prompts with the response that students have with them. It's quite the powerful resource. And then, of course, if you took it out the whole school year. So here's how that daily routine, I'm going to switch it from Organized Binder to non-Organized Binder classrooms so you can just see that. And you'll also notice all of or most of my images, I think, are made on binder paper. You don't even need to make copies to be doing some of this work. So I have a clear starting routine. And then I'm going to encourage you to go through this agenda and table of contents work. But let's jump to the ending routine, because it's also utilizing working memory. And with Organized Binder, it's all on that B page or that Weekly Lifeline. And since it's the same executive function, let's just talk about it real quick and then move on. First, I would encourage some sentence frames for these. With Organized Binder, you can see the kickoff and learning log there together. The kickoff or the beginning routine is this reflective experience, utilizing working memory. It's actually a strategy called Retrieval Practice. The learning log, for us, call it anything you want, is really similar, but it's a reflection on what I've learned or experienced today. So just a chance to kind of digest that. And if you think about that, inherent to this routine is a best practice, which is beginning with the end in mind. So if I'm a 7th grade ELA teacher and I have you for 50 minutes, what am I hoping you can accomplish or demonstrate or articulate at the end of our time together? And that's going to help guide my prompt for you to reflect on at the end of a class. So you could call it a summary, you can, whatever that might be. And we know that what it does is, I don't know if you've experienced this as a teacher, I certainly have, where I like over plan and I'm like trying to shove everything into my lesson and I can see that the time's sitting and it starts to feel kind of manic and I'm like shouting stuff as students are leaving the door because the bell rang. And we really need to have a few minutes just to process. So students need the structured organization, the structured organization for the concepts they're learning. Like it's almost like this learning log. It's like, okay, I've learned this stuff and it's like, I'm gonna file it away before I go and access it again. But they also need to deepen their thinking by attaching context to the content through their own personal experiences, and reflective closure activities can provide this. I like the kind of couple minutes, we're just making connections, reflecting. And again, this is not about being right or wrong. This is about process. Every time I'm having students do that reflection, grab it, articulate, they're actually utilizing and building their working memories. Here's a thing. This is, of course, an Organized Binder sample. I encourage you, for your teacher, to read these. Okay. In Organized Binder, it's the only place where we dare you to try it, because if you do, now, the reason Organized Binders are all on one page, it's called that Weekly Lifeline. So all these reflections, right? It's collected at the end of the week and read. You may have heard of the exit ticket or some other ways of trying to get that feedback every day. I'm a big believer in sustainable practices. And if you are a high school teacher, let's say, getting 150 pieces of paper every day with student reflections to read and ideally comment on and give back to them, that's just not sustainable. There's just going to be days where you don't have the time for that. You can do that if you want to read what students are writing every day, you certainly can, but you could back that up a little bit and get those check-ins once a week. And if you do have this beginning and end routine, now you've done the kickoff together, it's a reteach, you're going over it. You don't need to read those. The learning log, what we tell students is this is a one-on-one private conversation between your teacher and you, full access. And I'll tell you what, when you read them, it's like having a pulse on every student in your class in a way that homework used as a formative assessment, which is not an equitable or reliable practice. We should do away with that. Not saying we have to do away with homework. It's just not a formative assessment. These you show up and it's like having a pulse on students. And if teachers commit to reading them, students really start to really dive into these. And oftentimes things will come out that aren't even content related, because a trusted adult who cares for them is reading them. So
Hey, Mitch,
yeah,
Beth has a question, so I'm gonna just
interrupt me.
bring it up real quick. So she asked, do you spend the time pulling back the veil, if you will, and tell your learners what the kickoff is doing for them, activating your working memory, right? Or at the end of the class routine, what the end of class routine is doing for them as well.
Yes, I do. I find that you certainly don't have to, but that's a great question. First of all, Beth, thank you for asking that. I start by saying I explain how important it is to me as the teacher. And what I often tell my students is, especially with the kickoff, they kind of get like, oh, I get this chance to ask my questions, to reteach. It's kind of this fun thing. I tell them, like, at the learning log, I rely on that more than any homework you're ever going to turn into me. Like, I need to hear from you where you are to guide my instruction. So I let them know how much I rely on it. They tend to appreciate that, but they also tend to kind of nerd out a little bit, if you will, on kind of like the biology or the neuroscience of it. Like, oh, like, wow, there's really something to this. It's not just I go to school and I learn this stuff. It's like, no, we're doing some things that are actually helping you be more successful. So I find that I do get a more buy-in when I'm kind of open about that and present it to them in kind of a fun way. Okay. Let me draw your attention to this last sentence here. Elaboration is the process of giving new material meaning. So stuff we've done today or learned today, expressing it in your own words, not mine, your own voice, and connecting it with what you already know. That's the aim of these learning logs, or this ending or concluding routine. Okay. Again, it's not about right or wrong. It's about this effort. It's about this practice. This is my educational hero, so I have to give a big shout out, and it's so true. Liberating education consists in acts of cognition, not transferals of information. Paulo Freire, and it's an interesting dichotomy, though, right? Because if you are a teacher, there's stuff I have to transfer. That's what I'm hired to do. I teach this grade level, or I teach this subject, whatever it might be. And so here's the key. We know this to be true, that students need practice utilizing their working memory, these moments of cognition and metacognitive reflection. So if they get practice with that just by virtue of routine, then there's that kind of win-win. So I'm giving them these things that are going to help them be more successful, set them up for success. And I'm still doing the job that I need to do, which is teach my class or my subject. Great read here. If you haven't read Powerful Teaching, a plug for that book. I love this, based on a century of research. In order to transform learning, we must focus on getting information out. And it's a strategy called retrieval practice. So that's kind of the technique. The executive function is this working memory. And it's, again, I'm going to keep saying it's not about getting it right. It's about process. Okay. It's about process. There is an interesting, back to Doug Lemov, I utilize and recommend this. If you are going to have a beginning and concluding routine, when it's appropriate, encourage students to practice academic language. So you're not, you're not texting me, you're not even emailing me, you're not Snapchatting, whatever the new thing is. I don't even know. No, practice your academic language. So if you're like me, when I was designing Organized Binder, working 100% with second language learners, and I'm a science teacher, I got to help them kind of hone some of the basics with language, so we could work on sentence structure. You can do that in math if you have a times each day where they're writing. And this is such a great sentence, right? The complete sentence is the battering ram that knocks down the door to college. So that's just an encouragement there. But this is all kind of built on Marzano's work about exposures. If you use this routine, so his thing is find multiple ways to expose students to details, at least 3, ideally more than 2 days apart. Well, let's say it was Monday, and I give my lesson, you're my students, first exposure, first time you interact with it, let's say. I have a concluding routine, which would be a second exposure, this kind of reflection, no stakes, it's okay if you're struggling. I might give some next steps outside of class. That could be a third exposure. And when you come back to me 24 hours later on Tuesday, within seconds of getting going with our beginning routine, we're right back to this thing we're learning. All the while you're utilizing your working memory. I get to reteach. You get multiple exposures to what you're learning. And we know that the increased exposure means you're more likely to retain it. So what we use in our trainings is the word marinate. I like using that. I just tell students, like, we're just going to keep coming back by virtue of this routine, coming back to it. And you're just going to be marinating in this content. It's just going to kind of soak in because of that. So this is where that bell-to-bell instruction is a reality. I won't spend as much time on these other pieces. Again, we're utilizing working memory. The process is retrieval practice. But let's go back to the beginning now. So we would have had however much time you need or want to use with that beginning routine. Consider sharing it with colleagues or school-wide. But then you got to make a plan, right? Where are we going today? We got to have some idea what we're doing. That increases predictability, but this is where we can teach and model the skill of time and task management or keeping a calendar. So after the kickoff for the Organized Binder, after the starting routine, and then if you do that check, we turn to this agenda is what we call it with Organized Binder. I'll show you another one here. And it's just a real quick chance for us to introduce a lesson. We no longer have those, I got to update this, the in-class and homework titles are no longer there because some don't give homework or like you could define whatever you want those to look like. But it does give me a chance to say, like, here's what we're doing in class. Here's what, if you have anything outside of class. And then typically I would encourage you to move on. Like, it's just a chance to introduce it. Here's what's coming at you. You're excited. But don't miss this opportunity. And this is why ours are set up this way. It's 2 weeks on the front and 2 weeks on the back of this green page. So that what I could do is say, hey, we're going to start this new unit on the heart, the cardiovascular. And we're going to do a lab this week. And here we are at the beginning of the school year. It's September. We're going to have our first lab report due. And that's going to be due next Friday. Do you see that there? I just put it up on the board on the 25th. So let's write that on our agenda because that's what people do who keep a calendar, which is, by the way, why we don't call this a calendar. This is not that. It's an agenda. And I'm not going to give you homework or anything the night before so you can finalize your lab report. So let's write that on our agenda because that's what people do who keep calendar. And then I would just move on. And then we'd show up Tuesday. I would have done my beginning routine, introduced the lesson. Same thing Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. At the very least, no one's going to be surprised that this lab report is due. But kind of on the high end, they're starting to see this very basic skill of time and task management, like planning ahead, etc. Okay, it can be done on a simple piece of binder paper, as you might see here, using different color markers or highlighters. There's ways, of course, that you can be strategic with that. We encourage this in conjunction with a calendar, so that as I'm introducing my lesson, we're updating the agenda just real quick. But I might say, hey, take out your calendar or your planner. And is there anything from today's lesson that you should put on your calendar that you might need to look at before you leave school? Like, really starting to make that concrete. Because here's the deal. And this is this. I don't know if you know who Melba Beals is. She's one of the Little Rock 9 who integrated. Is it Little Rock High? Why am I forgetting right now? Well, I met her. She's the dean of diversity or director of diversity at a college that implemented Organized Binder. And we met, and then she wrote me this email, and I shared this with you. I could have left that first sentence off, but I didn't because I wanted you to know that Melba Beals called me a genius. But her last point, she was so excited about the program, but she said the last point hits on the most potent problem every student I've interviewed with has an issue with, or I've interviewed has an issue with: honoring the syllabus, reading it, studying ahead of class and preparations for exams and whatnot. So in other words, taking the syllabus and unpacking it on a calendar so that I look at it and I'm ready to go. And if I don't know how to do that, if I've never seen that modeled for me, how am I ever going to learn how to do it successfully or maybe successfully in time? So we start with that the working memory with the beginning routine, make a plan, usually just to introduce the lesson, sometimes get the model a calendar, and then we got to get our stuff together. If we're going to be successful, you got to be organized. And in Organized Binder, we call that a table of contents. And what we're doing here, just follow, there's our hypothetical day, the 14th, here is our class. Follow this date column. All we're doing, we would have done the kickoff, or the beginning routine. We would have introduced the lesson, and then we just record. Students are practicing indexing here chronologically. Anything that's created or handed out or taken out of a consumable just gets listed on this table of contents. And in most cases, teach your class. So that's this first few minutes, right? Next day, just see the column and then teach your class. So we begin, introduce the lesson. And if we're consistent with that, we're just creating this log as we're making our way through as we're making our way through this unit. So the table of contents is meant to organize and capture a teacher's unit lesson planning, which is just as important as the daily lesson plan. So you can see this routine, this beginning and ending routine really adds some structure to a daily lesson. This is going to capture the unit lesson planning. I really like using this. One of the reasons is students are keeping track. They're writing down. If you use point-based grading systems, you can still use it without that. But they're actually aware of when they complete or their grade. I love online grade books, but how many times have students come to like scratching their head? Why do I have this grade in the class? So again, here's an example of a non-organized binder classroom using the same strategy. You can imagine that the executive function here is organization. And what I would encourage if you're going to try this is just that number just simply gets written in the upper right-hand corner. Okay. Keep in mind, I teach in a fully digital environment and students are doing this in the analog, right? They're seeing it, they're creating it. When you get to the end of the unit, or by the way, we want to move away from this, put it in the table of contents. But here's two of my students studying for a cumulative final exam in June, with everything they've created or been given neatly chunked in thematic units from the first day of school until this day. And we don't know their grade. This is virtue of the routine. This isn't just for the quote unquote smart kid or the kid that's got it. This is everybody is getting practice with these skills because this is just what we do. Okay, and this is what's created. So all of these unit packets, which could look like this, it's a non-organized binder one. There's students studying with them. They all in organized binder, they end up at the back of the binder. There's a full-length tab that says completed units, but they could just end up here as well. They all end up there to create these portfolios that students would walk from a class, whatever the subject, whatever the grade level, with a portfolio of their learning that they've created. I've started calling them trophies. Because students are just so proud of them. And it's just this simple routine, updating a table of contents and then putting a number in the upper right-hand corner. Now, sometimes, this is the last one I'll hit on, it's also an executive function of organization. You don't want everything in those unit packets because it might be something you need to access more often. And that's where an appendix comes in. With us, we call it a toolkit, call it whatever you want. But think of anything that you might need to reference throughout the school year or from unit to unit to unit, or things you want to add to throughout the semester or school year that you just want readily available. And instead of number one, number two, simply we use F because it's the F tab. Here's one that's of course not an organized binder. And that just gets in the upper right-hand corner. Instead of the number one, number two. And there's an important distinction here. So the skill of organization, making that distinction between, oh, this is like very much unit specific assignments or work or resources, but this is something I need in my toolkit that I'm going to pull out and I'm going to use it as I execute on this job or this task or this project. Okay. Really great for PBL, by the way, this routine. And then it goes back into my toolkit. I need it here in my toolkit so I can be successful with the content. So just that's an important distinction with this executive function of organization.
Mitch,
So
we got another question. So Sabrina was, I think I was also very interested. You talked about, the digital and the analog, right? And bridging those two worlds. So Sabrina's basically asking, if the work is virtual, what are students doing with that work? Are they printing it and adding it to the binder? Her school, Sabrina's school, wants to use less paper.
Mhm. Yeah, it depends. That's a great question, first of all, but one that might take a little bit longer. I want to address that at the end. It depends on the learning environment. So, like for my students, I can't rely on printers or anything because they're not with me. So everything for Organized Binder, they come with loose leaf paper that students can utilize. The reason I'm showing the samples here that are mostly loose leaf binder paper is it's just a way to save on cost. But I'd have to know more about the context and the environment, but it's really about the routine. So for my students, they're experiencing this same routine, but asynchronously, right? They start when they choose to start, but it's got a beginning route. It's got that kind of same rhythm to it and conclusion to it. I would just need to know a little bit more about that. If that's okay, we could maybe take a couple minutes on the backside. I would love to have that conversation. Is that okay, Danny?
I'm not going to say it's not okay to learn. So
I'll be here if anybody wants to hang out after.
Yeah. So you teach.
All right.
If people want to stick around, they're welcome to. And if people have to run, that's fine too.
Okay, absolutely. And again, it's a great question. And I hope this is coming across. I'm showing you samples for no other reason than get your wheels turning about how you might be able to do this in your environment. I'd love to help you with that. And I'm more than willing to have that conversation, but just remember, it doesn't have to look exactly like this. I would encourage this routine. I've seen it work in classrooms all over the country. I want to make that point about teaching your class. This is meant to be the first few minutes and the last few minutes. The biggest issue, I've never met a teacher that's like, you start talking about executive functions. Nobody's like, oh, no, those aren't important. Everyone's like, of course, I know I need to address this stuff. I just don't have the time. And that's true. We rarely have enough time to get through what we're trying to cover in the first place. So I really want to emphasize that this is meant to be just a first few minutes and the last few minutes, but it's dovetail into what you're teaching. It's reinforcing the stuff you're working so hard to teach. Okay, so that's that nod and commitment to academic freedom. I knew this would happen in terms of time, so I just told you at the beginning, we haven't touched on goal setting, which is really important, and narrowing that down to an action item each day, not just lofty cerebral goal setting that doesn't mean anything, like very scripted. The chance to self-regulate. Think about this in terms of this routine, even that, okay, inherently to that is this, there's a bit of self-regulation there. Like, okay, this is a very predictable and explicit routine. Do I want, am I going to engage? Am I there's a self-regulation piece there, but there's more to be said about self-regulation. And then accountability. If we're modeling things with a binder, whether it's Organized Binder or your binder, there's a class sample binder. You got to model it for them. And if you do, which is very easy to do, just a version of everything they're doing, every 3 or 4 weeks, we pause to make sure you're staying organized. So by holding them accountable, we guarantee that they have that portfolio at the end. One thing about products, by the way, I just encourage you, if at all possible, and I know it's hard, source sustainable materials. Us in education, our industry, we are bad actors when it comes to the environment. And all the plastic and vinyl that's ever been produced on the planet is still here, unless it's been incinerated or shot into space. Okay, so all of Organized Binders materials are 100% recycled. Our binders are FFC certified. If you're going to source stuff on your own, I encourage you to do that if at all possible. And I understand that it may not be, but give that a shot. Got to end with Dweck. I always do. Simply raising standards in our schools without giving students the means of reaching them is a recipe for disaster. It just pushes the poorly prepared or poorly motivated students into failure, and out of school. Okay, love that, poorly motivated. And that's what these executive functions are all about. Okay, this is me. You can take a quick, you can always go to our website and get a hold of me too. I would love to hear from you if you have any questions. But we both have, I have a special for you I want to tell you about, because I knew I wasn't going to be able to get through all of this. So hopefully you've written that. We can come back to it. This is just for you, but there is a disclaimer. I can't see you right now. These are always so strange. And I can't see the chat. Danny's monitoring that for us. But like I said, this was hopefully just helping and providing value around executive functions, and not meant to sell you anything. But I do have an offer for you. If this is resonating with you as an individual teacher, or you're a school leader that's like, I want all of my teachers to go through this kind of training or workshop, this would be for you. But if you're not, and you're like, hey, I don't want something sold to me, I totally respect that. And I would just encourage you to log off now. That's not a anger thing, or I just want you to know I'm going to present everybody here with an offer. Okay. Is that all right with you, Danny?
I guess so, Mitch. We can do it.
All right. So here is, so what I've gone through 3 of the 6 skills, and there's more to learn. There's a lot more to learn, and a lot deeper dive actually on each of these skills. So we have a course that we released this year for this work called How to Teach Executive Functions in Any Classroom. It contains a lot of what I'm going over now, but of course, a whole lot more. We're currently, that's a $200 value that's there. And our special here, that the offer I'm going to make you, and Danny's being very kind to me, is if you sign up for that course, and I'll give you the URL at the end. And if you are a school or district leader and you want to talk about kind of more cohorts, more than just one individual, no problem. Just maybe shoot me an email. So we can do that in a group. But if you sign up for that course, here's some of the additional value. So you probably, if you don't know Danny, my good friend Danny, this is his latest book. And it is a fantastic read. And he has committed to, if you purchase the course, you get a signed copy of this book sent to you. And I forget what that's, that $30 to $35 value. And I thought, okay, I thought, and the signed copies go for like $235, I think. So can you imagine the value there? I'm kidding. So I thought it'd be helpful to have these downloadable PDFs if you're taking the course. So our encouragement is that you would actually print those out and have them as resources or as reminders for yourself, someplace visual, even on the wall next to your desk, that you'd have these charts. So we're going to include those. And then finally, again, this is not meant to be something organized binder, but to really get you thinking what we've created for our program that you can create if you're doing these, if you take this course and learn all these, how to teach these executive functions, is create some type of family or parent guide. All right. And the reason for that is and all you'd have to do, so what I'm going to include in the purchase of the course is our parent guides that you could use as a resource to get you thinking about, oh, I could use some of that, or what it would look like to have something for families. And the reason is this is all content agnostic. It's not something like, and they'll tell you where this came from for me. Most of my families, I had mentioned that the community I was serving, they weren't necessarily able to help with the content or curriculum or the homework that may have gone home. But that by no means meant that they didn't want their students to be successful. So I had to figure out some way to engage them in a way that was not linked to content or understanding the content. And that's this work. The guide, it's kind of like one of our trainings on the light. It explains the whole system, how it works, the executive function that's being practiced, how it's practiced, and then it gives them multiple questions or prompts to ask their child about this. So it's showing them everything. Like, here's where you could see what your student did today, or what their reflections were, or where their homework is, or here where their goals are, and maybe ask them this to move the conversation beyond how was school today? Do you have any homework? Right. So it's trying to take that further. And to be honest, it's actually supporting the development of executive functions from home. So that big deal, total all in, just for the price of the course. The course is complete with certification. When you finish, there's no final exam, so you can't get anything wrong. And I like to say that it's a course designed by teachers for teachers. If you're a school or district leader, what I mean by that is it is no more than, 90 to 120 minutes, so hour or two max. As great as a 5-hour or 8-hour training might be, most teachers I know don't have the bandwidth for that. So with, this, they can really get in, especially in cohorts, and have some profound work happening. And it's this simple. organizedbinder.com/go will take you to that course. When we see those coming through, we will be in contact with all the value add that we are offering. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate you being here. Either way, I hope you got a lot of value out of this. And I'm going to turn it back over to Danny from here. I see a bunch of chats.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. I took a whole bunch of notes. So just some of the things, and I actually I really like hearing from everybody too. If you put in the chat, maybe your number one insight, but I don't know. I'm gonna pick my top 3. One was just the question you asked, like, where am I on the journey? I thought that's such a powerful question, right? For students to have and just understand, right? That it's not all about mastery. I mean, you want to get to mastery, but it's important in terms of reflection, just knowing where you are on the journey. You talked about process being more beneficial than being right, So I thought that was a really awesome point. And I had a wondering, I wonder if it's the predictable routine, because you mentioned, was it Stanford? It was a research study, but if executive functioning is lowering depression, anxiety, I wonder if it's the predictable routine, maybe that creates some sort of sense of safety or a belief in one's, ability to be a success and that kind of stuff. But that's what I wrote down. So I want to say thanks. And I promised I was going to give you this feedback anyways. I have a lot of feedback to give you, Mitch, but I'm just gonna give you this one piece of feedback. And Tori basically was saying the same thing. You covered 3 of the areas, and there were some others that weren't covered. Maybe, I can talk you into coming back and covering the others too. So I think that would be pretty neat. So
I can blame that on Tori?
Yeah, or me, either or both. So hey, why don't you take your screen down so we can see everybody, and then if folks will put in there.
I was funny. I'm looking at the little Tori. I think that's a great idea, and of course, I would love to come back, and we could start with a quick snapshot of this, 5 minutes, and then dive into the others.
Yeah, nice. Sure. Well, we'll get into questions. If people want to stick around, that's fine. Kyle said his insight was the parent resource guide, so that's pretty cool. Melissa talking about having notes to bring to upper elementary teachers. So good on you for that, Beth. Second time seeing Mitch. Where was the first time? All right, Beth. But the thoughtfulness of his work, right? Doesn't his heart really come through? I love that about Mitch. He's an authentic guy for sure. Sabrina said,
the myth. Thank you.
I'm trying to make you blush. And then Sabrina said this was refreshing. Wow, that's really, really wonderful. And she said a lot more, but just that word refreshing. So I'm gonna put myself back on mute. I'm gonna put, and Pat said she'd appreciate the second webinar as well. So again, if you're interested in picking up Mitch's course and those bonuses for yourself or your staff, there's the link to make it easy. And no pressure there. We're just here to create value. And if you had questions, I know Sabrina had one, stick around for some Q&A. And otherwise, thanks for being here.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Hi, Mitch. It's Sabrina.
Hi, Sabrina.
Hi, so I have a question because my district uses Google Classroom a lot. They use that as kind of the, like this, just the online pinboard for all the kids' work. And so let's say I'm doing something on a Google slide and that's the assignment. In the notebook, you would jot it down as, assignment 1, and then you put the 1 in the corner on the paper. But if it's online on Google Classroom, how can we, keep that organized? Because that's the famous kids go, where is this? Where can I? And I'll say, oh, it's on Google Classroom. And they forget that it's there. They don't, they forget that that resource was there from the beginning of the year. So I actually went back to more printing things this year. I used to print for the resources for them to hold on to. Then we went paperless, because we weren't allowed to touch paper for a whole year. And so now I'm going back to more printing things, but some things, I do like the technology for, especially a Google slide presentation, and they make their projects on Google Slide and things like that. So how do you keep that organized where they can't just flip to it in the binder? How would you label that, for example?
Yeah, great question. And yes, Google Classroom, as many other online platforms, it's like the digital version of the book bag oftentimes, right? Everything's there, just like everything's stuffed into a backpack, but I can't find anything. And oftentimes in the digital space, it's even harder, right? Because it's not right here. Like one of the beauties of, if you were to incorporate some of this with paper, you can really see executive dysfunction if it's there. And if it's all online, you got to be looking kind of a little bit closer, I would say. So one question before I respond, is your school, is the goal to be paperless, or is the goal to incorporate technology?
It's to have a balance between the two.
Okay, good.
So they just, there was a paper shortage this year. So, there was like, let's try to use less paper. We were all technology last year, and our principal actually said, get the kids off the computers, 100%, and find a balance. So, but I do like some of the things that I transferred into technology, and I want to keep some of that stuff and still do things on paper as well.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to look for, especially for those kids that are so unorganized, how would you label that, or what would your suggestion be?
I have some suggestions, and I'm glad to hear you say that it's a blend. I wrote an article called, do you remember when screen time used to be a 4-letter word? Like, we used to actually care that kids were on screens, and then the pandemic happened, and it went out of our vernacular, right? Like, oh, and some of it was trying to stay connected. It was well intended, right? You're at home, but good Lord, get the kids off the screens. Get them off the screens. We know it's not good for them. That doesn't mean we don't incorporate technology. So the simplest way, you bet, Kyle. Great to see you, man. Sabrina, what I've done is keep the table of contents. And in the same way I put that little triangle on the number, have some kind of insignia, or the kids have a highlighter, anything that's highlighted or gets whatever insignia around the number, they know is in Google Classroom. That's step 1. Step 2 is that the organization of the classroom now, instead of the table, I should say it this way, each table of contents would have its own folder, and it would have the same name as the thing that exists in the binder. So let's just do organized binder. It would be table of contents, unit 1 or whatever. Or it could just be called unit 1 or G1. And when I'd open that up, numerically would be listed all of my digital assets. Now that might just be, let's say there's 15 assignments in this unit, and let's say 4 of them are in Google Classroom. They don't have to be 1, 2, they might be number 5 and 8. And does that make sense? And it actually helps students with organization even kind of more. It takes a little bit more from the teacher to pull that off, but it's not that hard, again, once the routine's established. So I'm introducing my lesson, we're creating this, we're updating the table of contents. I have it in the classroom so you can see it, but I make that note like, hey, keep in mind, this does exist. It just exists out in cyberspace or wherever that is, that, in Google Classroom. Does that help?
yeah, I'm already thinking about how to rework my Google Classroom for next year. So yes.
Great.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah.
Mitch, is there a brain piece around, I think there is, just the idea of writing it hand to paper and being physical. There's got to be research to support that?
Yeah. I have that research. I can share it with you.
Okay, I have your email. Okay.
Yeah, shoot me that. It's I mean, even just the power of taking notes longhand. There's a new book, I haven't read it
Yeah.
yet, called The Power of Writing Things Down. I don't think it's a deep dive in terms of like research, but yeah, I'll shoot you a few abstracts or articles on that for sure.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
You're welcome. So we met before, Beth?
Well, I was at Justin Bader. Is that how you say his name?
Yeah, the principal center guy.
Yeah, the principal
He's
center
the guy
guy.
that introduced me to Danny. Like,
Oh,
eons
really?
ago.
Such
Yeah.
a small world.
Mitch was his
Yeah.
first podcast episode. Can you believe that, Beth?
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
I
awesome.
had to have said that on the webinar just for my claim to fame, but yeah. Well, I'm
I was-
glad.
yeah, I was listening to another guy. I can't remember his name. He's from Australia, and he was talking about learning over the pandemic. And then you came up as somebody else that had some cool brain stuff. And then I know Danny from the Mastermind, so Organized Binder I've heard of. So yeah, the second time through, if I would do it again. Because I just wrote literally I did like a second course of notes all over my
Wow.
first course.
When you email me, send me a picture of that. That'd be fun to see.
Oh yeah, that's my brain on a page. I gotta go organize it now. Thank you
Thanks,
so
Beth.
much.
That's cool.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
Beth.
Thank you for being
Okay.
here.
Yeah.
Hey,
that was great.
Pat, have I met you too? Have we crossed paths before? No?
I don't believe so.
right.
My question for you is, a colleague and I are directors of teacher centers that work with about 24 different school districts in Western New York State.
Okay.
And we, I'm wondering, is executive function is a big thing for what our teachers want and need, but we can't mandate that these districts
Of course.
buy in, okay? Is there a way that we can expose them to the information in it and let them make it their own, or then buy into Organized Binder?
Mhm.
Or would it be of benefit for a couple teachers to take one or two teachers, or myself and the other director, to take the course and then take and transfer that information into something that could benefit all of our folks? Complicated question, and just something I can email you and give you time to think about it if it's too quick.
Please do. Danny might have some insight too. In terms of, I want to commend you on the non-mandated. Any of this work, if it comes down as a mandate,
Mhm.
doesn't work as well. I mean, pretty much anything, right? Like
Yeah.
it's
But the flip side of it is, if there's not support and just one or two teachers are doing it, it doesn't become systematic, even on a grade level.
Mhm.
you're
And
right.
then it doesn't help the kids in the long run.
You're right. So I have a few questions for you, and it might be something that we have another conversation, but it would be, what these 24 districts, like, are they really recognizing this need, especially coming off of the last 2 years, right? And what that looks like for them. Like the first thing I thought of is they all should take that course. There's no pressure. There's no, it does intro you to Organized Binder, but you're not mandated to use it, but you're exposed to all of the
What
the
works?
strategies and the theory. That probably would be the easiest entry in terms of a starting place for districts. That
Yeah.
would be my thought.
The thing that I'm thinking about in terms of change at a systemic level, and I don't know, like Pat, with your role and where you're at, what funding looks like. But but recently, I've been doing some work with the Delaware Department of Education, and they were able to. We did a workshop We did a workshop about the mastermind, and basically they committed to putting X amount of leaders, in the community. But it was only for the year, right? And so if they found value in it, they'd have to figure out the budget from their school, to continue past a year. But what I'm trying to say is that if there's a way to sort of maybe resource like one school or one department or a grade level to run as a pilot to, prove the concept, and you see, what we would guess is that this group, right, of educators would see so much more success with their students. And then people start asking, okay, what's going on here? And then usually, people figure it out from there. But I don't know if that's a possibility.
Teacher centers across, there's 126 of us across New York State.
Yeah.
We are funded by the New York State Legislature annually.
Yeah.
We are at a low point or next to low point. Low point was when there have been 3 years that we have not been funded at all.
Yeah.
And
That's pretty low.
about 10, 11 years ago, no, longer than that, because I've been here 10, about 15 years ago, they were at a high point of, a lot of money. So we're inching our way back up from the zero funding,
Yeah.
but we're nowhere near, we don't have a lot of money. We just,
Right.
I'm a retired administrator and teacher, and so I can do this sort of part volunteer, part paid. Anyway,
right.
so lots of thinking going on because I'm hearing that executive function is a need in our districts.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't want to keep you tonight, but I do want to think about, what's the way we might work together to do this.
Let's talk some more. I have some ideas too, and we don't have to dive in right now, but looks like we're gonna